Hello, everyone, and welcome to the India Conference at Harvard. My name is Aaran Patel, and I'm a Master in Public Policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. The India Conference is organized annually by students across Harvard graduate schools, and this year, our stimulating discussions across business, culture, and policy are focused on where our country will be at the end of this critical decade. The year 2030 is also useful in framing the ambitious, imaginative, and urgent work required on the climate crisis. Indian cities are uniquely positioned when it comes to the country's climate story. Our urban centers are bustling concentrations of residents who exchange ideas and goods and services. Given the power of these agglomerations, cities can drive the transition of every system that needs to be decarbonized, from energy to transportation to food to industry. At the same time, cities are already experiencing the impacts of climate change. The statistics are now manifest in people's lived experiences of deadly heat in Ahmedabad, flooding in Chennai and Hyderabad and Mumbai, the air quality crisis in Delhi, and cyclones battering port cities on both coasts, just to name a few examples. However, experts suggest it would be a mistake to look at climate change mitigation and adaptation as independent and siloed. Instead, they argue that we need to use climate change as an overarching framework for integrated action on public health, equity, and a range of other sustainable development goals. Ultimately, what we see is a duality. In a warming world, Indian cities are precariously placed, but also abound with possibilities. We could not ask for two better people to share their thoughts on these issues. For the next 45 minutes, I have the great privilege of moderating a discussion between Mr. Aaditya Thackeray, who will be joining us shortly, and Dr. Sunita Narain. During this time, we request you to share your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box in the Zoom window and indicate to whom your question is addressed. We will be posing some of these questions in the last 15 minutes of the session. I'd now like to introduce our two panelists. Dr. Sunita Narain is a Delhi-based environmentalist and author. She's currently the Director General of the Center for Science and Environment and editor of the fortnightly magazine Down to Earth. Dr. Narain plays an active role in policy formulation on issues of environment and development in India and globally. She has worked extensively on climate change with a particular interest in advocating for an ambitious and equitable global agreement. She was a member of the Indian Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change and has been awarded the Padma Shri, India's fourth highest civilian honor. Dr. Narain, we are really grateful to you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Very happy to be with you.
Mr. Aaditya Thackeray is on the road at the moment and hopefully will be with us in the next minute or two. So, Dr. Narain, perhaps you can share some of your big picture framing about where Indian cities have been in terms of the country's climate story. What are some of the lessons that we've learned? And is the moment that we're in right now unique?
You know, Aaron, you framed it so well, and I want to take that forward. I think that's really the issue, the challenge for us. Now, it's very clear, India is urbanizing and urbanizing very fast, and we will do so even more in the coming years. The entire world is. We are also driven by the fact that there's vast opportunity in urban areas. Today, our urban areas have a huge issue because of the sheer numbers of people who live here, but also they're growing in, if I look at my own city of Delhi, I can see that there are vast settlements growing on the outskirts of Delhi, where large numbers of people are migrating in, finding work. That puts huge pressure on urban services. The need to supply water, the need to take back sewage so that we don't destroy our rivers, the need to make sure that we can have the right to clean air, the need to make sure that we have a building stock which can provide for all. And in all that, have a livable city in which people can commute, people can enjoy green spaces. So huge area to actually re-envision our urban spaces. And I think this is where the opportunity, in fact, it's not a challenge, but the opportunity of the double crisis of both environmental degradation as well as climate change gives us. The fact is we cannot build a sustainable urban future in the way we are going but we can certainly envision it differently. If we could think of planning for mobility so that you could plan for mobility for all, you could actually make sure that you do not have the crisis of air pollution. If you could plan to make sure that you could reuse and recycle every bit of your waste, you do not have to end up with having massive areas of waste dumps, which are adding to both pollution as well as destroying land. So there's a whole variety of things, Aaran, that we could do. And I think that's the opportunity today to rethink, to re-envision. And for me, the biggest issue is really that if you look at it and if I asked you today, what is your idea of a sustainable city? And what do you envision as a modern city? All of us will close our eyes and say, oh, New York's beautiful, London's beautiful, Shanghai. But actually, those city models are completely inapplicable for us. They won't work for us. So we have to rethink and redream, if I may put that, a model of a city which will work for a country like India, where still we have massive numbers of people who live in poverty, and yet we need to find a way to be able to grow and do that at a time when the world and the planet is risked because of climate change.
Thank you, Dr. Narain. And on that note, speaking of the chance to build a new model, I have the great privilege of introducing Mr. Aaditya Thackeray. Thank you for joining us, sir. Mr. Aaditya Thackeray is the Cabinet Minister for Environment and Climate Change, Tourism and Protocol for the government of Maharashtra. He's also a member of the Maharashtra Legislative Assembly from Mumbai and the Guardian Minister of Mumbai Suburban. During his tenure, he has launched ambitious statewide programs on climate change mitigation and adaptation, notified Maharashtra's new electric vehicle policy, launched the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, and brought over 9,800 hectares of mangroves in the state under statutory protection. Under his leadership, 43 cities in Maharashtra have joined the Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience. Mr. Thackeray has received the Inspiring Regional Leadership Award from the Under 2 Coalition for Climate Action. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Thackeray.
Thank you. It's truly a pleasure. My apologies for joining in 2-3 minutes late. I've been on the roads, just got one moment off and joined in there.
It's wonderful to have you with us.
Wonderful to have you with us.
So Dr. Narain just shared some of her perspectives on where we are and where we're coming from in terms of Indian cities. I'd love to hear your thoughts on your reflections about COP26 in Glasgow. Typically, these international conferences only focus on national commitments and targets, and you were one of the few representatives of a subnational government. What were some of your takeaways from the conference about Indian cities and climate action?
You know, so to be very honest, this was my first COP actually, in obviously the capacity of being a minister. And one of the most important things that I felt, and I was told by everyone there, is that the first time it was about regional governments. It was about, you know, everyone engaging as one global community, be it a national government, as a regional government, as NGOs, as corporates, as everyone coming together. And for me, what was really crucial is that the COP and the international community really recognized, be it in the mainstream events of the Blue Zone or in the sideline events. You know, we had multiple forums and events where all the state or subnational governments rather came together, having their own agendas in terms of how do we excel in taking a country ahead. Because finally, when we speak about climate agenda, yes, you have national governments around the world who will be creating policies or the broader framework. But when it comes to implementation, especially in countries like India, where we're more like the EU in terms of size, population shape, economies, I think within India also we have the global north and global south in terms of economies and states. So for us as states, it's really crucial to come together and work together. So I think that was the biggest takeaway for me from the COP, that we can work as subnational governments and we can connect around the world for us as technologies, innovations, economies come together and our abilities to really take it ahead.
Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Thackeray. On that note, in terms of the possibilities for collaboration, Dr. Narain, you've often spoken about the need to move from transitions to transformations. And when we think about possibilities for collaboration or improved coordination between the states on urban governance, which is a state issue, Under the mandate of cooperative federalism, using a council of states, what could this look like? Because there's great complexities. When we think about, for example, transitioning the energy system and moving away from coal, that will need close alignment and coordination with the union government as well, since power is a concurrent subject between the union and state governments. So how do you see this kind of healthy competition and also coordination looking between states?
Aaron, I think what Mr. Thackeray just said, I think it's a very important part of how we move ahead. I mean, what is very clear in climate change and in environment is that we need cooperative politics. We need politics in which we are all together and there is no, finger pointing that, you did this and I did this or I'm responsible. And that's why I think Mr. Thackeray walking that extra mile to be able to go to Glasgow and to be able to say, let's engage, let's work together, let's actually build a common future together is very important. Now, when it comes to say, let's take energy, the toughest. Let's be clear about this, Aaron. Nowhere in the world has the world actually found answers to the energy conundrum. The rest of the world has moved from coal to gas, and gas is still a fossil fuel. We are being lectured to by the whole world to say we should not use coal, but that's only because as a matter of circumstance, we are late to the party. We have come when the carbon cake has already been eaten. So there's actually no crumb, there's little just crumbs left for us. And we're being told you're late to the party. You don't have any, the carbon budget is over. The world is close to 1.5 degrees. And country like India must stop, using coal. Now, as an environmentalist, I'm very clear, Aaron, we must stop using coal. But we must stop using coal because of local air pollution. I mean, Mr. Thackeray has recently put out a very interesting call saying that he is going to review his thermal power plants from emission factors. Very, very critical. Now, for him, the most important thing is going to be the local air pollution because of thermal power plants. There is massive use of coal and pet coke. Pet coke, of course, we got banned, but coal in small boilers across the country because energy is unreliable. It's also costly. And so industry is moving to using coal, massive pollution because of it. We need to deal with it. Now, the good thing is the right to clean air is something that everybody has to enjoy. And this is where we cannot talk about, whether it's the center or whether it's the state, they have to work together. The answers are difficult. There is no doubt. How India will get out of coal is a very difficult issue. But for me, the first step is let's clean up the existing coal-based power plants. Let's get them to meet the emission standards that were set in 2015 to be implemented in 2017, extended to 2022. Why are they not being implemented? Then let's look at the aging plants. Let's look at the old plants, which are today so inefficient that they're actually bad for the economy. Let's see what can be done to replace them, either with gas or with other technologies, whether it's biomass and others, which will actually improve efficiency. So I think we need to find answers which are good for India. And the most important thing for India, and I think that's something we need to keep in our sight, is India needs affordable power. We have vast numbers of people who cannot even afford anything which is coal-based. So we need to make sure power is affordable. And I think that's the challenge for politicians like Mr. Thackeray. And I think they're walking a very interesting line to make sure that they can find a balance moving ahead. And I think that's the kind of political leadership that we will need in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Narain. And on that note, Mr. Thackeray, Maharashtra has ambitious plans for net zero in 43 cities by 2040. But as you've said yourself in a Hindustan Times interview and on several other occasions, we need to act. Plans for even 2030 are too far away. So what are some of the concrete steps in the short term towards reducing cities' carbon emissions, with power, of course, being one of the key areas, and also increasing cities' carbon sinks to draw down carbon from the atmosphere? How do you see your government monitoring and measuring this in the short term?
So before going into that, I'll also touch base on what Ms. Narain was also saying, because what is very crucial again is, we are a cooperative federalism sort of a government, and we have to have this cooperation at all levels. See, finally, with political ideologies, it may be different or aligned. Everything is, different in the world of politics. But when we have certain things like environment or industry or things like sustainable development, that is where we need to collaborate and cooperate with the government at the top, the government below us, in terms of the horizontal mobility, in terms of in terms of vertical mobility, in terms of horizontal ways. We need to look at what other states or other governments across the world as national or subnational governments are doing, and sort of learn the best from them, look at think tanks, design thinkers, because it's no longer the work of only the environment department anymore. We've got to work with other departments as well, be it energy, be it transport, urban development, rural development, planning, all of it coming together. So that is one. Moving towards, of course, energy requirements, like she said again, what we went to Nandgaon and did, in terms of clearing the ash pond, or ensuring that now they go for a process of FGD or emission control. All of that was not really because of a global commitment, because largely these global commitments, even today, be it national, be it international, be it on a state level, are on paper, and these are commitments for the year 2030, 2040. And my worry is, because they're so distant in the future, how many of us are actually keen on working from today? That is one. What is very crucial is why we went to Koradi or Kaparkheda or to Nandgaon as a thermal power plant inspection is only and only because of local villagers, local farmers from there complaining about fly ash, complaining about ash going into their water streams, into their ponds, into the rivers, into the wells, covering their homes with the fly ash. I think that was very crucial for us as a thing to act. Now, in terms of looking at this decade, or at 2040 or 2030 or whatever we see it as, the Prime Minister's goals being 2070. And I believe that states like us, as Maharashtra, and many more states like Tamil Nadu, Delhi, can help the Prime Minister achieve this goal much faster than 2070. He's looking at a broader perspective of India at large. We can look at our own states, where we can look at sustainable development, look at industries that move towards green industry and moving towards sustainability and citizen partnership. Now, for us, the bigger targets are really energy and transport. Now, these are two targets that we need to look at as a deep dive, as we go ahead in terms of how do we get to decarbonize these sectors. Now, obviously, in the terms of transportation and in terms of the whole sector, we're looking at largely the public transport sector. How can we decarbonize that with either EVs or with hydrogen energy? So this is one. When we speak about EVs also, we're looking at renewable energy supporting EVs. Otherwise, it's no point bringing in EVs. It's got to be a whole ecosystem of clean energy supporting electric mobility coming to our homes. So that is one. We've also gone as far as mandating government officers and offices, public elected representatives, to have EVs as new vehicles, either they as rent or buy in the near future from Jan 2022. So that is going on. All our public transport buses, be it in Mumbai, be it in Pune, Nagpur, Thane, Navi Mumbai, Sambhajinagar, are mandated to be either electric or clean alternative fuel or hydrogen fuel buses. Now, this is something that we've actively been working on, and our work has started off. So if you see, most of our tenders are in progression. We're procuring all of these vehicles. In terms of energy, yes, the road ahead is very, very difficult, because as we move ahead, development has direct correlation with energy usage and energy consumption. Now, the hope that I get is you've got many private players like the Ambanis, the Adanis, Tatas, SRs, all of these private players, and many more. The amount of investment they're looking at in terms of clean alternative fuel, be it hydrogen, be it electric, be it solar, I think this is where my hope comes from. Apart from that, yes, we're working closely with the government at the union level and local self-governments, where we're looking at firm and clean energy powers. Because see, what really matters for us is not just clean energy, but also a firm source of energy, where storage is really efficient, where it is economically affordable for a lot of our cities and villages to get that power. Now, what we're looking at is better rates with solar energy, better rates with wind energy, even better rates with hydrogen in the near future. So if that is the case, yes, then there is a faster way to move towards clean energy. At the city level, at the village level, we have what we call local self-governments. Now, be it the municipal corporations or the village panchayats or the Zilla Parishads, a lot of them have a certain degree of autonomy. Yet, as the state government, we're providing tools and mechanisms to support their move and transition towards a greener path. So I think what I believe, seeing the future, I don't think that electric mobility or hydrogen mobility or even clean energy is a distant future. I see this happening way earlier than 2020, 2030. And that's what I see because A, the affordability, B, the economics works fine for people as well as governments, and C, the need for moving towards it.
Thank you, Mr. Thackeray. I have a follow-up question on this piece of target setting and coordination for both of you. I think something that all of us struggle with, whether it's in the political class, whether it's in think tanks or in academia, is just scarcity of reliable data. So if we don't have an accurate understanding of what our sources of emissions are, it becomes so difficult to create an emissions inventory and then know how to balance that out. What are some ways that you see that being overcome? And to Mr. Thackeray's point about coordination between a range of currently siloed ministries, agencies, and departments, how do we build a paradigm shift there? Just as an example, I know it's very early days, but the climate cell in the Mumbai Municipal Corporation has only received a 1 crore budget to do this incredibly heavy lifting of trying to bring together so many different municipal departments, state agencies. How do you see that receiving more support or push from the cabinet? And how do you see that, balancing out the needs in terms of where we are with the data scarcity to set more ambitious targets?
Sure, I think
Do you want me to
first.
take it?
Yeah, you go first and I'll go after you.
Thank you, Aditya ji. So, Aaran, I think two things. Data, I think, is something we struggle with in India. Let's be clear. We struggle with on both issues of local air pollution as well as climate change. But it is improving. And I am an activist as much as a researcher and an environmentalist. So for me, I want to move with whatever we know. Okay. I also believe that we know enough to be able to take the actions moving ahead. If I know the sources of pollution, air pollution, and they're not rocket science, we know that they're vehicles, they're industry, there's burning of coal in small boilers across, there's thermal power plants. So there is enough known, and I think that's really where the crisis also, even though I'm, as a researcher, I need more data, and data helps politicians like Mr. Thackeray, leaders like Mr. Thackeray to take better decisions. There is no doubt at all. But I think that even as we collect the data, we need to be very clear that as of today, we know enough to move and we know enough to act, and the action has to be much more focused. I was on the Supreme Court mandated authority called the EPCA for 10 years. And, we brought in the CNG work in Delhi. We pushed for the ban of coal in the city of Delhi. We pushed for a ban on import of pet coke into India. We closed down the Badarpur power plant in Delhi because there is enough known to be able to take those actions. And I think if we only sat back and said, oh, we still have to inventorize and we don't know enough, we wouldn't have acted. So I'm not denying the need for data, but I'm also stressing the need to be able to act. I think your second question really was about how to get coordination and how to break the siloed action. That's something Mr. Thackeray will be a much better person to answer because he's on the hot seat. And I think the most difficult job for a politician and for a leader who wants to drive action today is really to be able to know how to work the system in unison. And it's not easy at all. And I don't envy Mr. Thackeray at all for the tough job he's doing, because it is one of the toughest things today to be able to get all the departments together. And I think the most important thing that we need to understand today is that environment is today beyond the Ministry of Environment. It is actually better placed. And I think that's what Maharashtra is doing, is better, it's placing it within a leadership so that you can actually drive the action. To me, it's the Chief Minister's office, it's the planning office, which really needs to drive actions, because if I know by experience, if an environment minister talks about transport, it's already poo-pooed. What do you know about transport? So I think Mr. Thackeray will be a much better person to answer that. He's really at the hot seat on that.
I mean, it is not really extremely hot because thankfully we have a chief minister who is also a wildlife enthusiast and a conservationist.
Yes.
But, to start off with, of course, in terms of how do we create the coordination in terms of, different departments within the government, what we have done is we started off by presenting the IPCC report to the cabinet. And what was very surprising is, we did not expect the cabinet really to entertain us beyond 5 or 7 minutes, but it went on for about 45 minutes. They started asking us questions, cross questions, trying to understand more, trying to gather more data. So that was one in terms of the interest that was, created out of the IPCC report, because yes, maybe the IPCC report is even today a lot toned down than what the truth is and what we are facing. So that is one. The other is, of course, there is larger awareness because in terms of what Maharashtra's faced in the year 2020, we faced 3 cyclones. Now, that is something we've never faced on the western coast of India for a long, long time. I've never heard in my lifetime in the last 30, 31 years of having a cyclone on the western coast. So that was something. And apart from that, the last 3, 4, 5 years and the entire decade, really, we've seen droughts in terms of Marathwada, Vidarbha, northern Maharashtra, and a lot more places in Maharashtra till about from 2011 till about 2016, 2017. And the very same places now are being hit by floods, flash floods, mini cloud bursts, hailstorms, unseasonal rainfall, extended rainfall. So obviously we see the gravity of the situation. Now, in terms of obviously the weather events, these are not anomalies anymore. These are not erratic weather patterns anymore. The erraticity has a certain pattern. And that is what everyone has clearly understood to be as climate change. In the year 2020 itself, when we were facing and battling COVID, as in a dark room without much data, and even today, largely, we have no, global understanding of what COVID is in terms of a unanimous understanding of COVID as what the virus is, how could it mutate further, whatever. In the same year, we've had to almost give out compensation to the tune of 14,000 crores in Maharashtra. And the compensation is actually only a tiny fraction of what the loss really is in terms of, and all of this compensation is non-COVID. It is due to erraticity of weather, be it hailstorm, cyclones, sudden cold waves or heat waves. Now that is where the government of Maharashtra really understood what climate change is. We formed the Maharashtra Council of Climate Change, headed by the Chief Minister, co-chaired by the Deputy Chief Minister, who also happens to have the portfolio of finance and planning. We've got transport, we've got UDD, we've got RDD, energy, industry. These 6 or 7 key departments who earlier would bully their way through environment, permissions and considered us to be hurdles. Now, because of a chief minister who's a wildlife conservationist, now suddenly the Forest and Environment Department and Climate Change Department has got equal say in the cabinet as the other so-called important departments. Frankly, all departments are important. Now, under the chief minister's guidance and, with all of us working together, things like RA, which is almost 808 acres in a city like Mumbai, has been declared as a reserve forest. We're going for about 10,000 electric buses till 2027, only in the city of Mumbai, apart from which the other cities are going for that. 10 conservation reserves, 2 sanctuaries, 2 Ramsar sites, 1 flamingo sanctuary. We've also got 11,000 hectares of wetlands coming under the Reserve Forest Act as mangroves in a span of 11 months. Now, these are some of the things that we've been doing. Now, obviously, here is where I believe, and I strongly believe, that we need a council of all states across the country to, formulate a policy for environment. Exactly like how the finance department for the union ministry, union government has for GST, you have a GST council. The union department for environment and climate change needs to have a council of all states for environment where we can actually discuss, debate different perspectives, different ideas for, environment and climate change. Because frankly, what affects us also affects Goa, also affects Gujarat, also affects maybe Madhya Pradesh or Karnataka. What affects Odisha may be affecting and impacting West Bengal. Now, we don't have a common platform as ministers to come together. Now, we tried something through C40. I had a conference with Delhi and with Tamil Nadu and with a couple of more states, which we had sort of initiated. So we need a formal platform initiated by the government of India for all environment ministries. I think that is one. 2, maybe they can have councils of climate change at the state level where all the other departments need to come together and set targets and goals of how they can achieve within their own departments ways and pathways towards a greener future. Because I want to reiterate, it's no longer the work of environment and climate change department. It's all of these individual departments that probably can work in silos when they know what they want to do. So they need to have a single focus of moving towards that in terms of ease of living as a target for all of us. And in terms of the first question you asked about data, data will always be moving around. Data will be quantifiable in terms of how we gather data. That is always a debatable question. Sometimes you have fudge data coming in, sometimes you have data cleaning that happens, transparent data that comes in. Even with COVID, as states battle, COVID, we have multiplicity of data coming in. For us as Maharashtra, we've tried to keep as much as data out there as possible, because not for us, for state governments or governments 100 years down the line, maybe they would get a point of how we dealt with pandemic, with our good things and bad things, the things we got right or the mistakes we had. We need data. But obviously today, when the world is battling with COVID and when people were on the hospital beds, more than data, what was really important was the response, an empathetic response, a humane response towards COVID. And frankly, if you see what we are battling around the world, COVID and climate change are the two biggest issues for us as a global community. So I think that is very crucial, that whether you have data today or not, that can happen simultaneously, but your response has to be more humane, more sensitive, and towards a sustainable future.
Thank you both for sharing these very thoughtful responses on these points of data and governance. I want to build off Mr. Thackeray's point about in 2 years, the Maharashtra government paying out about 14,000 crores, $2 billion in compensation.
That's just 1 year. 2021 is yet to come, as our accounts get done in March.
Right. So on that note, again, a question for both of you. What can Indian cities do to adapt to the world's warming? And how can we move to some of this co-benefits framing and reimagine these transformations to make sure that they're socio-economically inclusive?
Aaditya ji, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Cities really can form the base of climate action, because of course, we've been sort of in a way responsible for all, the trouble that has happened globally. Not 100%, but to a large extent in terms of 70% because of our carbon emissions. Now, the real opportunity I see here is India is on the cusp of, going either up in terms of ease of living and quality of life, or spiraling down into a terrible shamble of what we can call cities, but they will never really be cities. Now, what the advantage is even in Maharashtra, when we speak about cities, right, we've got almost 43 cities in the race to zero, all of which are Amrut cities. Now, these are million+ cities. But if you travel to most of the cities over the years, the city sprawl has only increased. The population density has increased. The population has increased. We've got almost 6 million people in these cities, and yet we really don't have a plan for the cities to grow in a particular way. Now, how we define as cities in India is the population density, concrete roads, glass buildings, and certain other parameters that go along. And then you attach a smaller gram panchayat or a nagar palika, merge it with a city, and that is what a city is. Now, can that really be defined as a city? Okay, even if it is a separate city or attached to a city, are we really able to provide enough resources, amenities, utilities, opportunities to our existing cities? We cannot. Are our funds enough for the existing cities? Not yet. But I think what we're doing in Maharashtra is working with, again, think tanks like WRI, with NRDC, with many more partners around the world, be it C40. We're trying to define what urbanism means, because urbanism needs to have, and probably even rural governance structures, better solid waste management, segregation, in situ waste disposal, and then of course if you need something else, you move towards an incinerator or something which is more eco-friendly than a dumping ground. You need to have better stormwater drainage, sewage treatment plants. You need to have footpaths. You need to have traffic management. You need to have design thinking in cities. Today, when I travel to many cities across Maharashtra, what I'm doing is meeting municipal commissioners, aligning and attaching them to think tanks that are working pro bono with us only for the love of cities. And when cities grow, you need to have traffic management systems, public transport systems, pedestrianization. Aesthetically, you need to have cities that are upgraded. So to define cities, you need to have different parameters. Only when you can actually get cities into this. Then, of course, whatever work that a municipal commissioner or a mayor is mandated to do, if he or she can do it perfectly well to 100% of its capacity, you're already working on climate action. Because what are you mandated to do? Your solid waste management, sewer treatment plants, or sewer management, wastewater treatment, grey water discharge, maintenance of urban forests and urban parks, footpaths, traffic management. Now, this design thinking, if it can come into a cities, we're a better city, of course.
So let me take that forward. I mean, I very much agree with Mr. Thackeray. Everything he said is perfect, is exactly what needs to be done. I'll just frame it along the lines that we are looking at where, you know, as you said, Aaron, the whole opportunity of co-benefits. I mean, Mr. Thackeray is absolutely right. Indian cities today are really growing, and everywhere I see them growing in what I call the illegal, unauthorized, and growing because of the huge pressure that is coming in. And as I was saying, it puts massive load on water, sewage, air pollution, waste management in our cities, and of course, housing. But suppose we sat back and we said, okay, so we have a crisis. We have a crisis of both the urbanization that is happening today and the fact that these cities are going to be battered even more in the future when it comes to climate change. I mean, just look at the years that have gone by in the last few years. Every time it rains, a city goes under because no longer does rain come as a moderate event. It comes as an extreme rain event. Now, what is the learning from that? The learning from that is, and this is where the opportunity is. Today's cities are desperate for clean water. But what is happening is, and I can take Mr. Thackeray, the example of Mumbai, something that actually I looked at very carefully, long distance transfer of water coming in from the Sahyadris, Western Ghats into Mumbai. Now, the problem is not the supply of water, but the taking back of the sewage that is generated because of water coming into homes. 75% of what you get into your house, it leaves because with sewage. And the problem is that our municipalities are so cash-strapped, our water department so cash-strapped, they can just about supply water. They don't have the ability to take back the sewage. Most of Mumbai, most of Delhi today is what could be called an on-site treatment system. When we've done what we call shit flow diagrams for these cities, you will find most of the cities the waste is not intercepted, not treated, not being able to be disposed of. Now, here is where the climate crisis and today's water, sewage, pollution crisis comes together. And here is where, if you start re-looking at the city and saying, listen, for me, the most important thing is drainage. The most important thing is to hold the water where it falls, because when I have these extreme rain events, I need to be able to hold the water. Now, how do you hold the water? In the lakes, in the ponds, in the green areas, which are also the living spaces, the green spaces, the lungs of the city. And they also are the spaces which today we have literally created hydrocide in. I mean, Mumbai has the Mithi River. The Mithi River was a fresh flowing river. And today it is officially called a drain. My city of Delhi has something called the Sahibi River. You have never even heard of it because today it's called the Najafgarh Drain. The name has changed. So you can actually see now the opportunity that opens up to say, for climate change, I have to live with my water. And to live with my water, I will do as much recharge as possible. I will depend on groundwater, reduce my cost of supply of water, recycle and reuse my wastewater and put it back into the same lake, pond, green areas that I've created. I could go on, but I think the essential point is that, and I'm supporting Mr. Thackeray's view on this, that, you know, we need to have a plan. We need to have a clear idea how to move ahead and how do we take the challenge of climate change and the challenge of environmental crisis and actually find a solution that will work for both.
If I could just take it ahead from here, you know, just for 2 minutes, because I want to highlight what she said, and it's very, very crucial for, you know, most of our Indian cities in terms of water, because 3 quick points. One is, of course, like she exactly mentioned, Mithi, and, you know, most rivers across India and even Maharashtra, you know, I've been going to most of the cities now as environment minister, I'm going to riverfronts. Either you have a riverfront development plan that is concrete and actually creates a bucket effect because the river is going to flow out and you have floodplains being converted into plazas. I think that is extremely detrimental. 2, you know, you've got this whole thing where cities actually started settling around rivers hundreds of years ago as small settlements. Then they became nalas, and now they've become gutters and drains, and that is really detrimental. I've seen the Mithi also near the airport. The runway had extended straight into the Mithi, and the Mithi had actually come down to 3 meters, and we had to obviously extend it, not 3 meters exactly, but more or less to that size. And we have to now start widening and deepening it. Two, like she mentioned, most of our cities and around the world, the drainage for any rainwater drainage, we have the drainage capacity of almost 50 millimeters per hour, max to max 80 millimeters per hour. Beyond that, the capacity really doesn't fit in because the pipes change, the roads go haywire. The rainfall that is happening today in most of our cities is more than 250 millimeters, 300 millimeters an hour, sometimes even more. You've got many cloud bursts in the last 3 or 4 years. And I was discussing this with the IMD as well, one of the people out there. And the data really correlates to what I said, that we have mini cloud bursts almost every time. 3, in 1832, 1834, many places in Mumbai, which were like, for example, if you come to Gwalior tank, now it is a Maidan. 100, say in 1830 to 1834, in that span of 2-3 years, because you had malaria, dengue breeding, and a couple of more diseases, all of these tanks were closed. And now you have Maidans, and now you have probably buildings out there. And that's where maximum flooding like Hind Mata and all of these things happen. Fourth, like she said, the sources of water. As cities, now we'll have to look at other sources of water. We obviously have 3 or 4 dams around our geography in terms of where the BMC pulls its water from. We were planning a dam near the Gargai, river, and it was such a plan where almost 400,000 trees were supposed to be cut. Around 30,000 crores would have been spent. 30, at least 25 years to build the dam, interlink 2 rivers, Gargai and Pinjal, then bring all the water from there and get a meager about 600 MLD. Now, what we're doing is, instead of that, we've scrapped that project. We have, it is actually in the wildlife sanctuary. So I don't know who planned the project a couple of years ago. You've got the forest outlet and you've got a couple of endangered species there. That is scrapped. And now we're looking at desalination, drawing about 400 MLD at 1,200 crores or even lesser. So I think that balance is somewhere we need to strike. And more than spending, you asked me about climate budgeting and only a token of 1 crore. I think more than spending, we need to see where we can save by actually going more sustainable. And that is where we can really work on.
Thank you, Mr. Thackeray, for sharing, that historical perspective, especially in terms of cities' relationship with nature, which I think continues to be something that we need to think about carefully today as well. Dr. Narain, I'm going to ask you, before I hand over to my colleagues for sharing some of the audience's questions. We've understood some of this historical perspective. Looking into the future, there are immense possibilities for Indian cities to do things differently. Some decisions may need to be taken today, which may seem radical, but even in 5 years or in 10 years, as the climate crisis worsens, may seem even conservative, if not mainstream. What are some new imaginations that you think we need to be seeing in our cities?
Aaron, I think there's huge, as you said, there's huge possibilities, but it does require a vision and courage to reimagine. And I think what we have done up till now is really tinker around. It's a band-aid. We need to go beyond the band-aid. Today, climate change requires us to have a surgery, and that's really what we need to work towards. I'll give you 2 ideas that excite me enormously. One is transport. Mr. Thackeray said very clearly, transport, top agenda. Now, all over the world, transport has not been fixed. Let's be clear. Washington, 99% people still drive a car, okay? And all Washington and all of US that has done to fix transport-related emissions has been to talk about e-vehicles and to the transition to e-vehicles. And every time you have tried to fix the fuel economy of vehicles by improving it, the number of vehicles on the road goes up, the number of kilometers driven goes up, and the actual impact of it gets negated, which is why transport-related emissions all over the world, in terms of GHG emissions, are not going down. So let's not live in any illusion that anyone in the world has fixed transport-related GHG emissions. However, Indian cities actually have an extremely sustainable mode of transport today. We are not only car-driven. If you look at the data that has come out from the Ministry of Urban Development in Delhi, most of our cities, the bulk of the people either walk, cycle, take a bus, or in the case of Mumbai, take a train. Okay, they're already in sustainable modes of transport. It is a minuscule number of people. In my city of Delhi, 15% of Delhi drives, 15% of Delhi drives only, and yet they occupy 90% of the road space. Now, the question for us is, where is the road space for the remaining 85%? Where is the airshed for the remaining 85%? Now, here is an opportunity for us to actually reinvent mobility. For us, transport and mobility is not about e-vehicles, but what I liked about what Mr. Thackeray said was his focus is on e-buses. Now what we need to do is to focus on the scale of transformation of e-buses combined with walkability, with cycling, with the train system that Mumbai has. Incredible to be able to build on it. So I think what we need to think about is the scaling up of solutions which are affordable for us and yet sustainable at a scale that the world has never seen before. And it's the same thing when it comes to water, with sewage, with building material. I mean, today we have massive building stock that has to be done. Building stock and the rest, as we were discussing before we started, the building idea has always been green certification, which is I can build badly and then get a green certificate by getting a very good sort of double glazed window or a air conditioner with a 5-star rating. What we need to talk about is how do you incorporate passive building architecture into our buildings? I mean, the glass building concept in India is the most environmentally unsustainable idea possible. Okay, we need to think beyond that. So, I mean, that's also about affordability, because if I can use passive architecture, bring down my heating and cooling cost, I actually have more affordable thermal comfort. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, Aaran, and I think, we need leaders like Mr. Thackeray who will be able to, take governments beyond the ordinary, take governments to walk that extra mile, to be able to run that extra mile, because that's what today's demand is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Narain, for sharing that, and to both of you for essentially aligning on the fact that we need to move from incremental innovation to architectural innovation in order for Indian cities to be able to chart a unique path forward. I'd now like to hand over to my colleagues Arshaya Sood, who's pursuing a master's in urbanism, landscape and ecology at Harvard's Graduate School of Design, and Avantika Mathur, who's a master in public administration at the Kennedy School. They're going to be sharing some of the audience's questions with our esteemed guests and closing out. Dr. Narain, Mr. Thackeray, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, real pleasure.
Thank you, Ms. Narain and Mr. Thackeray, for that very gripping and stimulating session. We have a lot of questions, very interesting questions from our audience, but we're going to restrict ourselves to 3-4 of them. So the first question is about carbon taxes. Is Maharashtra thinking of adopting cap and trade and carbon taxes to rein in the emissions problem and lead the way for effective policies nationwide? I think this question can also be talked about from a national perspective. It's asked by Suman Chandra.
I mean, that is, of course, a larger ambit, because to be very honest, in terms of carbon taxes or any more taxes, we already are burdened as a country with a lot of taxes and a lot of inflation, a lot of price rise. So that wouldn't really it may not go down with the people. If you've got to move the people, just today I had 2 events in Maharashtra in terms of with a bank which has multiple farmers attached to it. It was a cooperative bank. And then another event where I was again having a direct interaction with the farmers, and we were talking about climate change. There's already a lot of debate and discussion on climate change in terms of climate action, in terms of mitigation or adaptation. Now, what we really need to do here is, rather than going and addressing the matter in a very indirect fashion, be it with incentives or taxes, because incentives obviously creates a load on the treasury, and do we really need incentives to survive? That is one. And 2, in terms of taxes, it creates a load on the people. Can we really address this issue directly by going out to the people of every age group, of every gender, breaking the jargons of climate change. Because even today, what happens is, when I see what happens at COPs, and then you come down back to your country, interact with a lot of NGOs and organizations, we still have this conversation in a certain group of people. We're not really breaking the jargons and simplifying what climate change is. If someone's seeing rainfall or thunderstorms in January or February in Mumbai, you need to take it out to the people saying this is climate change. Of course, in the city of Mumbai, we sort of enjoy our monsoons. We sort of feel a relief when there's little drizzle in the summers, but that is detrimental. And rather than creating something which is economic directly and creating more of a pressure on the people, I think let's start addressing and having a conversation. Also, we need to politicize the talk of climate change. We need to have political parties fight and have credit wars over climate change action. That's when really India would move towards climate action.
For me, the issue of carbon taxes is a little more complicated, only because India has very high energy prices even today. And you have to understand, it's really putting a very high, extraordinary load on the poor of our country, but also it's actually leading to industries in India moving out of the energy system into extremely polluting forms of, alternate forms like coal. So I would really think that carbon taxes for India need to be, and we already put a coal tax in any case on our coal. I think we need better and different solutions. Also, this is where the data question that Aaran talked about comes in, because all the PAT schemes require very good data, and current PAT scheme of the government of India, we have just done a study on it, and it's actually leading to not even incremental action. It's not even leading to any action. So we need to think about much more, and that's been also the case of the EU schemes and many other schemes, where many of these schemes have just ended up with fudging, being very good for creative carbon accounting, as I call it, but not really in terms of hard action. But one tax I would argue with Mr. Thackeray that even though we have many taxes, one tax I think, Mr. Thackeray, we definitely need is a tax on parking in our cities. And I think that's where the big issue and I can tell you, Mr. Thackeray, I have been asking for this in Delhi for some years, and we even got a court order. We got all the paper. We got a parking policy done. We also have worked with your government on a parking policy, but it is tough because the middle classes, and this is middle class, it's not the poor, because it's not the poor who own the car, but it's a very tough thing. But at the end of the day, the parking charge is what also brings the transformation or the transition in mobility patterns, and it's very critical we do that.
I think parking transition is tougher than the energy transition.
I agree. I agree, but it has to happen.
It does. I mean, even you're aware, we've got a parking policy in the section, I think in section 11 of our DP, and Mr. Jha has been working on it. Sort of created public parking lots, electric charging stations there. So there is a certain mindset building, but again, it's going to take a lot of push.
It's tough, yeah.
All right, that was a really interesting perspective. We have another interesting question about whether you have seen innovative approaches to reducing carbon emissions in other cities around the world or in India that you would love to see expanded. It's asked by Anisa Andrabi.
Sunita ji?
So, I think lots of cities are doing, and Mr. Thackeray is part of the coalition, and, people are working very hard. But please, it has the scale of the transformation is what we're all dealing with, which is very tough. I mean, my favorite city in terms of mobility transformation obviously remains Singapore. But is it possible to do that kind of a model in other parts of the world? There is huge action that is European cities have taken with the bicycling, with the whole effort to move towards single lane cars, move towards public transport. I mean, I think the mobility area for Europe and many cities has been where leadership in cities has been. Retrofitting or building stock has been another area where a lot of cities are doing some very interesting work, which is important. But I think from the ideas that you have heard today, I think the kind of challenges that an Indian city has, and the kind of challenges that, say, a politician like Mr. Thackeray has, where he has to also, there are very large numbers of very poor people whose livelihoods have to be secured. There is also the whole issue of, being able to find affordable transport, livability, in our cities. I think, the scale is tougher for us, but I still think, and that's where today's dialogue, I think, is very interesting, because the opportunity exists in doing things completely differently. And I think if we try and do incrementally, we won't succeed. But I think very interesting work is happening. Mr. Thackeray, you will know more about this. You've been interacting with a number of cities.
So we have been interacting with a couple of cities, especially through the Under 2 Coalition and C40 and many other partner organizations. Now, I remember in 2012 when I was first seeing the electric bus in London, when just walking around the streets. That was something so fascinating because it's emission free and it's sound free. And way back then, we got about 6 or 10 electric buses in 2015. We were probably one of the first cities in India to use it. And like you said, we've got multiple examples from around the world in different places with, in relation to your solid waste management, grey water treatment. The real issue is we need to go beyond pilot projects. We need to scale it up to be using it on an everyday basis across the board. I think that is extremely important. Two, the challenge for us lies in the geography, in the climate context, in terms of whether you have bicycle lanes or can you really walk. Yes, bicycle lanes are coming up, say, along the coastal road, along the Western Express Highway, in BKC, in multiple spaces. But again, can you really walk or cycle to work? Because 5 minutes walk or cycling in an Indian city would, make you full of sweat and you need to take a shower as soon as you hit your office. So can the offices really adjust to the shower cubicles? Because I know, I went to this office of Netflix and they have shower areas because they're promoting cycling in BKC. So things like that. And third, of course, in terms of our cities, most of our cities have come after the advent of the motorable cars. And, they were planned in a way where you have the suburbs where the people live and you have the city or the central business district where the people work. And you've got to commute every single day. Now you come from Navi Mumbai, you come from Kalyan, Dombivli, Ambernath, Badlapur, and there's so many people who transfer, they commute from trains to rickshaws or buses or cabs. They have at least 2 or 3 modes of transport. Now, what is very crucial in here is, can we create a better sense of pedestrianization? Because I was, indulging in this conversation with Mr. Shashi Verma, who's the director of strategy for TFL for the last 19 years. And we were speaking of this concept of last mile connectivity, which has somewhat become a fad in India. It's become this whole concept of governance. And he said, Aditya, don't look at last mile connectivity, because if you have a railway line, if you have a metro line, and you still want another way of commuting or a vehicle for the last mile connectivity, how really shabby is your city that you cannot walk up a mile? Can you actually create the last mile as a pedestrianized mile? Or, look at buses. Now, London has 9,000 buses. 85% of them are double-decker buses. So you have capacity augmentation as well as buses that can move around. And that's what we're working on in our cities today. When we're looking at buses, we are trying to increase our buses. A city like Mumbai has always needed 10,000 buses. Today, we have 3,337 buses. Now we're looking at electrifying the entire fleet. We're also looking at hydrogen buses. But by 2027, we're looking at 10,000 buses. Again, 90% of them to be double-decker buses. So our capacity really is double. Because if you look at just Mumbai, your auto rickshaws are full. You have bikes that are going full. You have private vehicles that are at least 2 or 3 people in the car. You've got trains that are bursting with people. You've got almost every mode of transport that is full of people, and you still have people walking around. So as much as you do is less. So what we need to do is really adjust ourselves. Now, obviously, you have planned development like Dharavi, or you have many more slums that will go into redevelopment. Now, that is where the scope of creating smaller cities or 15-minute cities or 5-minute cities that can come in. And that is where we can really work on this.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Arshia for the next set of questions and wrap up.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we only have 1 minute left in our panel. So I'm going to have to wrap it up and skip over our last question. But thank you both for such an incredible discussion about all of these issues spanning across these sectors. So in this last hour itself, we've covered so many themes, including how cities need to move from transitions to transformations, how the impacts of profit-oriented growth are taking place in efforts for climate mitigation and adaptation, and how this was a wonderful point made, how governments can go beyond the ordinary and start to go beyond the Band-Aid. That was a wonderful quote. So thank you, Mr. Thackeray and Dr. Narain, for sharing your insights on climate action and the co-benefits taking place in India, and to all the participants who submitted questions. Please join us for the next few panels on media versus moguls, reshaping the landscape of Indian news media, and building resilient healthcare systems, which will be the next two panels taking place. I would quickly share our schedule for the rest of the day. And thank you both again, and to everyone who was able to attend this panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thank you.